My name is Steve Orr. I am the managing partner at Orr Group, and we welcome you all today. I was actually delighted to see the attendance roster because there are so many of you attending. I am sure it's because of our terrific panelists today, but a little nervous about it being the 4th of July weekend and maybe everybody was out at the beach, and maybe we're coming to you on the beach. That would be a nice thing. But welcome. We're going to talk about some really important issues today. We have two terrific, younger, newer CEO leaders at nonprofit organizations, and I think you're going to listen to and hear some really insightful views and recommendations. So I just wanted to start with a couple of comments, as we always do. If you've joined us before at the Orr Group webinars, you know that we do this every couple of weeks. There are a lot of you that are attending, many of them. We appreciate that, and we love your comments and criticisms, if you wish, whatever you've got. Please feel free to post questions throughout, either through chat or the question actually box is the best place to go, and we'll try to get to them all. But, my comment would be, we're still in just an amazing period, right? Obviously, COVID is not going away. We were hopeful that maybe it was going to subside this summer. It's not. In fact, you're going to hear from our friend Sean, who is down in Florida right now, experiencing, sort of the new wave. The whole virtuality element that we've all become now accustomed to working with, it works well, it seems, for many of us. Some people in this country, it works very badly for, and we have to feel for those folks. The racial injustice, that is just one of those issues that is so important and so tough to work through and work with. We're going to hear some views today from our panelists on that. And then all of that wrapped up into just the general economic upheaval. It's challenging, it's tough. It's coming back to some degree, I guess, but it's still very, very rough on the worst communities in terms of, struggle and unemployment and, already difficult situations. So we all know what we're in. I'm not sure all of us have solutions, but we have two folks today, who are dealing with it as best they can, learning an awful lot, in leadership positions. I think my advice generally to all of us who are leading organizations is embrace the change and probably expect more. This community that we're in, the nonprofit community, I come from the for-profit community long ago now, but clearly the entrepreneurial skills and the tradition of being, versatile and quick moving, embracing change is a little less so, although I think that our industry is changing really dramatically with these changing times. And I think that's maybe a good thing. The one good thing you could say from that, we're becoming, better seasoned leaders. But, these clearly are unprecedented times, and I think we need unprecedented leadership skills. So, all of our leaders have to learn to adapt. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean the CEOs of our nonprofit organizations. I mean people who are leading at whatever level. There's all kinds of definitions of leadership. So the comments today, I'm pretty sure will resonate with you regardless of what position you are in. I also predict that in addition to the continuation of change, that we are likely to see a new crop of very dynamic leaders coming along in the near term and in the medium term. And I think you're going to see younger, more open-minded to change, new ideas, digital focused. Lots of the, changes that are going on right at this moment will continue to bear down on us and be of interest to those who can, embrace and take advantage of those things. So new skills are needed. A modern leadership regime, I think, coming along, which is terrific. And, we've got aggressive donors who have a lot of questions. We have boards who are pushing us to do very creative and different things. It's challenging. It's fun for those of us who like it. Today I really want us to focus on the areas of challenges and success that these two folks have experienced. And I actually have a lot of experience too as a CEO, so I hope I can participate a little bit too. So let me introduce our panelists. Both of these folks, I've had pretty extensive experience with your organizations and with you personally, so that's a disclosure issue. First, Sean Kramer is the CEO fairly recently, within the last 6 months at a place called Diabetes Research Institute Foundation, DRIF. DRF is located and inextricably works with research for type 1 diabetes with the University of Miami. And if you look closely, you can see Sean is proudly wearing his emblem. Yes, where he went to college and I think to graduate school. You could talk about that if you want. And then I also knew Sean briefly in his previous position as a CDO at Parkinson's, and he had stints at the Red Cross and American Cancer Center and just on and on, long list of positions that he's had. So good for you there. And I was the CEO at DRF before Sean, so he and I share a kinship there in terms of understanding what's necessary to run that very dynamic organization. Gary Linnen is someone that actually, Gary, we've probably worked around each other for at least, would you say 7 or 8 years? Because we were intimately involved with your organization, PeerForward, which you're now the CEO of. It used to be called College Summit. We were very much involved with the fundraising components. You have had 10 years of experience running the programmatic areas of the organization, now stepping up into the CEO position. Before PeerForward, you were at the Princeton Review, and you graduated from Cornell. Congratulations on that. And the very first in your family to graduate from a higher education institution. Congrats on that, and very important statement, for the organization that you run, because you're in the, college advancement business for lower income areas. So congrats to you and to all the folks that I know you are helping. So we have 2 great folks. And again, I want to remind you that we have a question and answer space down at the bottom of your screen, hopefully. So feel free to, throw in some questions. So with that, let's just go right to our panelists and let me ask some questions. And we'll try to make this as conversational as possible. The words survival and adaptation come up these days a lot because it's on the agenda of many nonprofits. Organizations have to figure out, how to maintain staff levels, sometimes without having the right number of clients to serve or limited resources. We all have limited resources, very challenging. Although I like to think, that's starting to reemerge now, the ability of donors and so forth. And then we're all having to create, we were talking before we went live about each of us creating in our many offices safe environments, really challenging. And, accommodating the many interests of our staff members and the many concerns. And, we each have to deal with it individually, and we have to create safe environments as leaders. So lots to think about there, lots to unpack. So Gary, let me go to you first. PeerForward focuses very much on helping youth and low-income communities gain access to college and careers. And I'm interested in your perspective in how PeerForward has been impacted by the inequities brought to light through the pandemic. What have your personal experiences been, and how is it impacting, the folks that you serve?
Great, thanks, Steve. You raise a great question there in that, given the fact that we work with, school communities across the country where we primarily serve, I think it's about 87% of the students that we serve are, identify as Black or brown folks. And so, interesting enough, the pandemic didn't have I put it this way, we had already been going through this for a number of different years. And what it did was actually highlight some of the injustices that we've seen from the educational side as well as from the social side. So for the past 20 years, we've been trying to address that within our school communities by getting our young folks to really go ahead and say, what is the systemic challenge that they're seeing? And then making sure that they are putting together some solutions to be able to address that. So what I've appreciated about what's now, unfortunately, it's really reignited folks to start looking at us and saying, oh, wow, it's been around? We're like, oh, yeah, 20-some years. And we're going to keep continuing to go ahead and fight it across the country.
I love that. Sean, maybe you have comments on, racial injustice and such. I know also you're in a space where the folks that you serve, diabetics, are particularly at risk, with this pandemic. So maybe you want to make some comments, starter comments on those things too.
Sure, and first off, I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. So thanks for having us. The Diabetes Research Institute Foundation is focused on one thing, which is curing type 1 diabetes. And as folks hear on the news almost every single day, diabetes is a comorbidity for coronavirus. And you see numbers of people that are impacted by diabetes, equally being impacted by Corona in just a tremendous way. So we are incredibly mindful of that. As it relates to the issues that are taking place in our country right now around, diversity and inclusion issues, we really took a forward approach to what we're seeing. We came out with a statement from the organization really kind of early on. And one of the things that we were able to do was to host, now we call it our town hall meeting with our staff. And really was just one of the most emotional days I think that I've ever had at an organization. It was incredibly impactful. People shared stories of their own experiences with racism and issues within their own families that they've gone through. And we had some actionable items that we took as an organization coming out of that. And what I said to the team was, this isn't going to be just a one and done discussion and conversation. We have significant issues internally that we need to be looking at and addressing as an organization. So we immediately formed a diversity and inclusion committee that came about. And I think the following day or two after that, had a board meeting, and I asked the Diversity and Inclusion Committee to draft a statement, talking about, the issues of racism and injustice within, not just the organization as a whole, but, what we could do to address that. So we looked at, our board specifically, and we are woefully underrepresented on our board, and have now made that a top priority for us to diversify our board. And then right after that happened was Juneteenth. And so made the decision to basically give Juneteenth as a paid holiday, that holiday or paid day off with Columbus Day. And so we're really looking at making, very specific, concrete, actionable items that we could do. Our senior team as well, we all made a contribution to the George Floyd Scholarship Fund that was set up at the university in Minnesota. And they continue, this group will continue to look at and evaluate what is happening within our organization and what specific things we can do. And in fact, just today I was looking at our employee manual, and what are we saying about things like conduct. If we have an employee or a volunteer for that matter that is involved with us or part of us that is out not representing the ideals of the organization, how do we address that, and how do we do that quickly? So we're trying to be as proactive as we can in this regard. It's important. And, I think what we said really kind of coming out of that town hall session was, we are comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that was a really big moment for us as an organization where, we called ourselves out, and we will continue to call ourselves out for the things that we should be doing. It's not okay just simply be not a racist. You have to be anti-racist. And that's the focus that I think we're trying to put on our actions as an organization.
That's great. I mean, those are some really actionable items that you all took. So congratulations on that. What I want to do in this session is focus sort of on three sets of issues. The board management, every nonprofit leader deals with boards of directors, and it's a challenge and it's fun. But there are a lot of issues there that maybe we can learn from you folks on. And then fundraising, that's always an exciting area. And then generally, let's talk just about pandemic issues and how it's impacting our organization. But Sean and Gary, you just talked about, the race issues and how important they are. So let me just continue on with that for a second, because as a company, I mean, our group is already, we were 18 months into a DEI intense effort. Then with this occurrence, it just makes it so important to stay consistently focused, not, just focus today or tomorrow, but consistently focused. And I like what we're hearing, in the environment from corporations and from organizations. You know, I enjoyed the back and forth with Facebook, you know, with the CEO of the NAACP and those and the other folks that were there. And, you know, I mean, just it's easy changes to make, you know, let's just do it would be one conclusion. But Gary, when you think about your own board, let's get into the board piece of it. And, you know, Sean, you just said you're woefully unrepresented, both in Black and probably generally of color board members. And that's an action item that I think we can all be thinking about, you know, aggressively now and would make a big impact, you know, on our communities. So Gary, what's your view of that?
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to highlight a couple of things I think that speaks to, again, even with our board involvement. So historically, because we've obviously been an organization that has been primarily focused on college access and success, and as I'm mentioning, we have young leaders right now that are stepping up to go ahead and discuss a number of the different injustices. We're putting together what we're calling a racial and social equity, social justice project that is really targeting, like, what is it that we need to be doing? Because young folks are literally standing up right now and saying, we're not taking it any longer. And so what PeerForward wants to make sure that we're doing is providing some structure around that. That's distinctly different than what we have historically been able to put a label on. And, you know, Steve, you hit it right on the nose. Like, we have to make sure that we're consistent. It's not just something that's around lip service. That's even when it comes to with our boards as well. Where boards historically have been, you know, homogeneous populations, you know, where ours is primarily, you know, white males. We have one Black female that's a part of it. And as a board, we've all recognized that we just have to do better. We have to do better of being able to identify other folks to be able to sit at the table with us so that it's not just, you know, one population, if you will, that are making sound decisions in there. And so our board is committed to saying, okay, now that we have a new leader of color, now that we're seeing everything else that's happening across this, this community, how do we diligently make sure that we make that as a priority for us? And not just to do it, again, for lip service, but because we recognize we're servicing over 87% of the population is Black and brown folks. Why are we not being representative at the board level as well?
Big point. I feel the same way in our own business. You know, we're working with so many, you know, great charitable organizations like yours. That's all we do is work with 501c3s. And so many of our, you know, beneficiaries or those who are being served are of color, but the staffs are of color. And we have color in our company, but not, you know, to the point where I'm comfortable, where any of us are comfortable. So it's a huge priority and it's wonderful to see. And we just all have to stay focused on this and go at it. Gary, another question for you. I know, you know, your background, you ran the program at, you know, PeerForward for all that time. And I watched you at work. You're very effective. Moving to the CEO position, and I know your board as well from lots of experience. How have you found that transition? You know, how, the set of responsibilities are really quite different than what you're accustomed to or you have been accustomed to. How are you adapting? How are you learning?
It's been I'm sure all of us can attest. It's one thing when you're on one side of it, like, oh my goodness, it looks great. And then the moment you actually sit in the seat and you see how the car is actually being run, it's different dynamics. I think it's a learning curve for everyone, regardless of whatever your specialties or skill sets are in that. But because I'm always hungry to learn, that has been what's been really, really promising. I'm also been fortunate enough that, you know, the individuals in the organization, as well as our board members, have been eager to want to teach as well. And so they're like, you want it? Here you go. Figure it out, you know? And so that I think has been quite, you know, the most exciting piece around it. It's the chance to be able to say, I don't know, you know, and I get the chance to ask questions that normally, you know, you can't because it's my first year. So I'm like, give me a blessing, give me a pass. It's only been 6 months. So I can ask any and every.
I might give you one pass, but watch out.
Yeah.
Don't make too many mistakes.
But I mean, it's about having supportive leadership around that are willing to go ahead and say, let's make sure that you're set up for success at the end of the day. And so our board and our leadership team has been quite fascinating in that space.
Now, Sean, I also know your board extremely well. I have actually a lot of good friends in your board. Now, because most board members at DRIF, you know, have kids with type 1 or they have type 1, that's a different level of, you know, emotion and so forth. So you find a lot of hands-on, right, involvement from your board. So how do you balance that? You know, the desire the board members have to probably direct you, and I was in your position, so I get that part, but also, you know, to enable you to do what you have to do to be a dynamic leader. How do you balance
that? Great question. And I think, you know, interesting to note, you know, and you obviously know this, Steve, from your own background with DRIF, that this is an organization that has been in some pretty significant transition over the past just, several years, with a number of individuals that have kind of sat in this particular seat. And I think the board really, number one, recognized that there needed to be a change in the way that we were structured. We have been primarily a special events focused fundraising organization, and in two communities in New York and in South Florida, really hadn't branched out beyond that. And so they took it upon themselves to really start to initiate some of those changes, bringing in Steve and your group to really kind of help lay the foundation and groundwork for what that was going to look like. And I think that at that point, it really kind of, the board members said, well, we really need to be involved right now in a way that we haven't been in the past. And they couldn't be simply passive board members at that point. And, what I would say is initially, my first few months here, they were very, very active, very involved, wanting to look at every, decision that was being made. And I think what we've been able to do, or at least I hope I've been able to do, is to really kind of show them that there is competent, effective leadership, at the top of the organization, and they have backed off a bit. And really, where we need them to focus, where all of us need our board members to focus on, is bringing their time, talent, and treasure, right? Not looking in on the policies of how the organization is being run. And in just the last few weeks alone, we came out of our year-end board meeting, presented a budget. It went really well. We finished the year very strong, despite the fact that we're in the middle of the pandemic, which was great. So I think they're moving back into the realm of, okay, Sean and his team, they have it. We're going to go back to do what we do. Let's make some introductions. We'll participate in virtual parlor events now, and make what we need to do on that, from that regard, and less on the, let's talk about who you're hiring now, right? So it's been a nice transition, and I think they're appreciative as well, because I know several of my board members were spending an inordinate amount of time on the day-to-day aspects of the organization. So it's been a nice balance, really kind of helping them through this.
And little did you know when you took this job, you'd be walking into a pandemic environment, but sort of what changes did you have to quickly make in your own leadership style and, organizational matters because of that?
Yeah, it was, so I started in January, and by March, I think by March 13th was my last day in the office. And, we had lots of big plans coming into year one, really looking at how do you elevate the fundraising. And we were really moving from, as I mentioned before, special events into major gift focus of the organization. And, recognizing that a lot of that had to be modified, right? So, and this is an organization that really just had not been used to that one-on-one donor interaction. So we had to look at, things like how do we do parlor events, right? How do we do donor cultivation events? So we moved to a virtual model pretty quickly. So we now have virtual Meet the Scientist events that we're doing. And we have another one coming up actually tomorrow night. They're packed. We have not had an issue getting donors interested and engaged in the discussion and the dialogue. And we're doing things, just slightly differently, right? I think as most of us are, right? Zoom is now our new mode of communication. I think one of the things that we're looking at is, with people being at home, easier to reach people now. And so, you have an opportunity to engage them in different ways. So we're doing things like sending out video messages instead of emails, right? I think everybody misses the human interaction, the human contact. So instead of me just sending a message saying, hey, Steve, how's it going? I'm recording a video message to you and saying, hey, I'd love to see you on our next virtual Meet the Researcher event. So doing things like that, and even changing the dynamics of what we call them, right? It's like, it's not that we want to have a meeting, right? It's let's do a virtual coffee, right? Let's get together and do this. So, just changing the terminology of how we work and the way that we work, I think has been really beneficial for us and the team.
Yeah, I've seen many of your communications. They really look sharp and engaging, and something you really want to look at and follow. Gary, what have you found? I mean, I think you came in. Did you come in January of this year, Gary?
Yes, I was appointed in October, then officially started in February 1st.
Okay, so
On right around the same time, we had our board meeting that was supposed to be in person in March, literally, and I had to come back to New York and then turn around and literally everything closed. So pretty rapidly, we had to close all of our offices and figure out what we needed to do. Because we primarily work with schools across the country that were closing as well, we wanted to make sure that we did not disrupt the programmatic elements of what individuals needed at the end of the day. So we quickly put together, an urgent support initiative that allowed individuals to think about how do you support individuals virtually, whether it's through a podcast, whether it's through, different modes of communication now that, you have Zoom and everything else in that respect. How do you make sure that you're supporting them? But even from an internal side, we wanted to make sure that our staff was being supported. So we started sending around snacks once a month just to say, hey, we're thinking about you, and here you go. And we had a weekly staff meeting as well, just to start making sure that we had some level of continuity because it was a new norm. Our DC office primarily were individuals that were used to coming to the office, but our remote staff was used to working from home. And so this was nothing new for us. But how do we get our other staff members acclimated to this space? When it came from a fundraising side, we quickly jumped in and reached out to all of our stakeholders and said things are about to shift dramatically for us. And what we need to know is how can you support us throughout these endeavors? Because historically, for the last 20 years, we've run a summer workshop that used to be in person, had 200 individuals. This is the very first time ever that we don't have the chance to go ahead and train the young folks like we were used to. So we needed to reach out to our, stakeholders and say, what do we need to do? How do we build this virtually? How do we make sure that it's something that's still scalable and still meets the needs of the young individuals that we are working with? And getting them to really understand. I think one of the beauties, lastly, I would just say is, we asked our peer leaders that we were working with, what did you hate about this entire experience? And for them, it was remote learning they didn't like because there was no level of consistency. But what they appreciated about what PeerForward immediately did was provide some level of consistency and norms for them throughout the day. They said, let's just get on a call every Tuesday and let's just check in and say, how are you doing? Not did you get something done, but are you okay? And allowing individuals to just be. And so I was really excited about that quick change for us.
Yeah, and Gary, one of the questions we've gotten here, and please to the audience, go ahead and submit your questions. I think the best way is to integrate them into the conversation as we're going. So Gary, a question here about, is the board as interested and committed to the DEI features we've been talking about as we seem to be?
So based on individual conversations, yes, I think they've finally got to a point. It's funny, one of our board members just sent me an email. He was like, it's my time to listen and learn. Just knowing that individuals want to intentionally do that, we're seeing that our board members are committed to it. And there are other individuals that are saying, if they want to be about it, they're willing to. And for those that are not, it is okay. But, we're holding people, to the fire to say, are you willing to be a part of this mission going forward?
Sean, you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I can say the same for our board, that they are behind our efforts around diversity and inclusion, both at the board level and organizationally as well. I think they recognize this particular moment. I think they also recognize, I'm dealing with, again, as many of us are, pretty much the same, a very similar demographic, right? Older, white, male, involved, and they're also
those older white males. I tell you, it's really a problem. Go ahead.
I think they're recognizing that it's equally now their time to start to think about, okay, what do I do? I've done this for 20, 30 years. I've had board members involved for literally that long. Where is the next crop coming up? So I think that they're all in favor, and they're actively supporting and assisting us in making these changes.
So a related question, and by the way, Kip, you might want to post your question again. It didn't come through in its entirety. But there's a question here about, okay, you've talked about increasing diversity of your respective boards, but in doing so, are you adding seats or are you replacing? And how are you messaging to folks, that they're not diverse enough if you're replacing? That's tricky. Assuming that they are passionate about your mission, how are they receiving that message? Either of you have comments on that?
Yeah, if I may, so it was interesting. Once we mentioned the whole DI thing, I would say over a year ago, that's the natural question. Oh, so do I need to give up my seat? And what we essentially said, no, we're not, don't give up your seat because you still bring value, but understand we do need to add an additional person. We need to be intentional about who is the other person that we're adding in to that additional seat. So for us, we're adding seats, we're rebalancing for those that are, are cycling off because, some individuals, they've now reached their 8-year mark. And so we need to start adding, but I'm not trying to get just to add.
Got it.
Yeah, and for us, and again, Steve, a lot of the board members that have been involved. I think the challenge that we have is with a lot of board members is you have that 10-15% of the super active, and then you've got kind of a group in the middle that are moderately active, and then you've got the 10-15% that are kind of the dead wood, so to speak, on our boards. And I've made it pretty clear that, we need active people engaged on our board. And it takes us more work. I think everybody would agree. It takes more work to track down and chase down the deadwood folks that are serving on our boards than to keep those that are active and engaged, happy with us. So, for me, I have no issue whatsoever telling the board that, it's time for, XYZ individual who hasn't attended a meeting in 4 years or hasn't made a gift in 4 years, that it's time for him to go, and let's get somebody on that is more reflective of who we want to be as an organization.
And a question just popped up related. Are you relying on board members to understand the full extent of DEI, or are you bringing in help, consulting advice? Anybody?
So great question. At this point, we have not made a formal presentation to the board about about diversity and inclusion outside of the specific statement that I read at the board meeting. They have been informed of what our efforts are. My goal is to do a full presentation from the Diversity and Inclusion Committee that they'll present at the fall committee, fall board meeting specifically. And, at that point, take a temperature and figure out, what else do we need to do? If I need to bring in some outside assistance, we would look at doing that. But, I've got really great board members I've had wonderful conversations with. They're, like I said, they're 100% behind the efforts of what we're doing. And if I do need the outside help, we will call on it. But we're handling it internally at this point.
Yeah, I concur with Sean saying, because we did a presentation to our board last year where we surveyed them, asked a whole bunch of DEI questions, and then let them know that this was important to us. Again, they were really, really receptive of it. So we're going to keep it in-house, but be very diligent about how we're, having these. And you said it earlier, like, how do you have conversations and be okay with being uncomfortable in it? And I think individuals right now, particularly for our board and within the organization, we're willing to go ahead and do that.
So one perspective I have is because we, I guess about a year ago at our retreat, invited a guest who was a consultant on DEI issues to speak to us. And we all found it really insightful. And I don't know if we hired that group or a different group, frankly, but we did retain a group to come in and coach us through, to a different level. And I would say it's been a great experience. We still are moving through it. But so if it's relevant for your boards out there and those listening to us, I would recommend it because it brings in a level of expertise and process that is really valuable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're committed to it as a group, you're at staff and board, that's great too. Let's move away from DEI unless we get more questions on that. But here's another question related to board involvement. This is something everybody can relate to. What do you do when they, want to be too involved in the day-to-day operations, the hiring, the, policies and so forth that they're not happy about? And then I'll add to that, even though the questioner didn't, what happens when the largest donor in the room, makes all those demands and requests, which we all are so fond of? What happens then? None of your board members are listening today, so you're all good. Go ahead.
I would say, again, as a new individual, and this is about like, how do you balance it, knowing that you're going to have a difference of opinions. Some of our board members are, former founders. and there are individuals that are heavily ingrained into the work. What I found is that it's about respecting their opinion, letting them know what your vision is, and just being, coming to a place where you both are. If you lean too much into every decision, then you're not really stepping up and being a leader. And it's okay to actually disagree, but just be able to be, if it's a disagreement, you got to stand behind it. And so that's kind of how I lead in general, but respecting what they bring, because they bring a lot of value in, and try to get them to understand what their boundaries are in that space.
So
yeah, I would echo what Gary just said. Number one, there has to be a level of trust that you build with your board, especially as a new leader coming in. There's not a lot of it, right? They've brought you on board, but what can you really do? And so listening, I think, is a critical component. But also having a plan, a well thought out plan. There was I will just share one particular story of an employee that we knew we needed to terminate. And the board wanted to make sure that we had thought through every single scenario and option available. And once I had shared that with them, they felt comfortable that, okay, he's got it. He and his team are good. We built some trust there. We know he knows what he's doing. So I think the more that you can come with a fully baked, plan or concept that you have thought through every scenario and, A, B, C, and D that they can come with, it's a lot harder for them to say, well, let me give you my advice because you've already thought about it. So, that has been helpful for me. In terms of really kind of moving our board members away from, the day-to-day of what it is that we're doing. And in terms of, the largest donor in the room, because, and Steve, we've had the largest donors in the room, making, statements on this is, you just have to be respectful and listen. And I think, again, as, sitting in the CEO seat, there will be times where you will disagree, and it's okay. And I think as long as you come to a decision that's right for the organization, and you have thought through all of the issues surrounding the decision that you're going to make, I'm in favor of sticking to your guns, because that to me is what leadership is.
I do think this whole category, I've been outsourced CEO at 5 different charitable organizations, for periods of a year to 2 years. And you gain a big perspective when you do that. And managing the board relationships is, I think, probably the most important job, because there's an element of fundraising. There's a lot of programmatic, resonance there, and you want your board to be involved, yet there are boundaries, as you're saying. And, you need the freedom to run the organization and make decisions. So anybody who's in this position understands what I'm saying, and it's a critical area. So, thanks for asking. And then here's one more. What should you do if you find a board member is meeting with staff without your knowledge? Anybody want to touch on that one?
Same. I think it's about candid conversations and respecting each other's boundaries. Like, I was hired for a reason. And if you trust and believe in the work that I'm doing, we just have to remind ourselves of that. And so it's okay just to have a reminder conversation, in my mind, respectful one.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. It's a conversation, number one, with the board member, and then secondarily with the staff member. I'm perfectly comfortable with staff reaching out and connecting with board. I think they need to be able to do that. But the thing that I have had told the team is, I just don't want to be surprised, right? Where you're having a dialogue with a board member, and then I get a phone call on the back end that says, I just heard all of this information, and I had no idea. So just don't surprise me, and make sure that the conversations that you're having are appropriate is the other aspect when you're.
So that's really important. My advice to all staff members who might be listening in today is respect your CEO and don't put that person in an uncomfortable position, because that is what will happen if there's information conveyed and conversations that are had that the CEO isn't aware of, which, it's great. You want staff members to be interacting with board members, just as you're saying. So I think we could all agree on that one. Let's move to fundraising, because this is such a critical area, obviously. with pandemic issues, Sean, what you already talked about the event piece, but I do know, because I was part of the transition as well, moving from events to other forms is really, really challenging. Are you putting, even more focus on major gifts and other, tactics away from events?
So yes, 100%. And I give kudos to you, and your team for really kind of, like I said earlier, really laying the foundation for a lot of the work that's happening on the major gift front now. So we have been able to shuffle around our org chart a bit and have hired in some additional major giving team members. Have been able to promote one of our team members into a major giving role. We can't just abandon the events, right? So we still have a focus on our events, but how are we then switching and moving away from what has been the traditional style of event that the organization has done for the past 40 years into the new, right? So, how do we take an event, that had chefs cooking at your table and
Right.
make that virtual? And I think we've solved for that. We're actually going to have people hosting, chefs in their own home in small groups, less than
Great
10.
idea. Great idea.
You
That
know,
event is
so
very popular. I know that.
yes, yeah, correct. And it opens us up now to moving away from having, an event in a hotel ballroom. I can now have that same concept, spread across the country. So we are going to be doing that. So there's a lot that can be done, with fundraising, and we're not slowing down. I think what I have said to the team is, we're full speed ahead. We're looking at the landscape and saying, especially now, as I mentioned earlier, with diabetes being such an issue as it relates to COVID, that we need a cure now more than ever. And it's imperative upon the community to really get behind our organization that is solely focused on finding a cure for type 1. That's all we do, to support us. And that's the message that we're going out with. And equally what I have said is, we have to go out with a big message. What I consistently tell the team is, little ideas bring little money. Big ideas bring big money. And so we are really pushing out big, BHAG, right? Big, hairy, audacious goals for the coming year. And, not that I'm not worried about the pandemic, but diabetes is still a major issue and it needs to be cured. It needs to be cured now. And that message, I'm hopeful, is going to resonate with.
Gary, Tony asked a question about digital. Let me ask you that. Obviously, we've all become, really heavily reliant, even more so, and probably a good thing, on digital techniques. And so how are you bringing your board along in that respect? And how important is that?
So because we primarily work with high schools and colleges, and as we all know, in the fall, they don't know if they're going to be meeting in person, if it's going to be virtual, if it's going to be a blended approach and so forth. And so we've strategically had to move our entire programmatic elements to a digital format, which becomes beneficial in two different ways, and why the board is really excited about it. Because one, it lessens the cost of our actual programming. It allows us to actually scale much greater length. And so anything around scalability and, minimalizing the amount of expenses, they all for it. Like literally, I have some of my board members calling like, oh my goodness, we can actually get it for a free or reduced cost. What do we need to do? So excited about that space because we get the chance to support, our school communities in a totally different respect. And that leads to, part of the conversation when we're talking about fundraising, where, if there was ever a time for us to lean in on this idea, like we're built off of a peer-to-peer model where we believe a 17-year-old is more inclined to, to listen to another 17-year-old. And the streets and the young adults are doing that right now. And what we want to be able to do is provide that level of structure for them so that we can actually get them in a place where they're actually creating change. And so from a fundraising side, people are all excited about that because it gets a chance for us to live in a digital space, but still to be able to have impact.
That's great. Good insights there. There's a question coming about, is this the time to launch a capital campaign? I think I'll take that one because I am every day living capital campaigns. And, as you probably know, most organizations, were at some form of capital campaign before COVID. and paused in some respect. Almost everyone paused, but not, there were only like 1% of organizations that actually terminated the campaigns. So you didn't see any campaigns going away. And I will tell you, in the last 30 days, our firm has been contacted, or we have contacted others and been, the response has been, I'm thinking or am now ready to launch a capital campaign. So I'm telling everyone out there who's listening right now, this is a seemingly good time because there's time to plan. The summer is a good time to plan. People are still listening. Most people are, sitting at home, not sitting, are at home, more attentive, able to take calls. Interviews are easier, that type of thing. And the fundraising market is clearly coming back. So, and there are some very large dollars moving into spaces like, inequity, racial inequity, and clearly, frontline COVID activity, big dollars being raised there because donors want to be helpful, and be responsive to what they're feeling and what's happening right now emotionally. So I would say there's great opportunity, not just in those categories, and whatever your mission is and whatever you're doing. I think, crafting the right message, coming up with a case statement, et cetera, those are really vital things, but I would be encouraging on those fronts. I want to ask that you guys, we've got 15 minutes left, and this is a great conversation. You guys are terrific. Sean, let's go with you. When you think about sort of the longer term change and the world is changing and has changed so radically, in all these ways we've talked about, are you starting to think about, well, guess what? We're going to have to really make some substantial longer term things, not just go to virtual coffee breaks and stuff like that, but how does this change the very essence of how you do business?
Yeah, it's a great question. The essence of fundraising is relationships, right? It's a personal relationship, either with your frontline fundraisers or a personal relationship with your organization. So I think that is not going to go away. That will never change. People make gifts to people that they are close to or issues that they are supportive of. And the reality is in the diabetes space, there are upwards of 60,000 people a year that are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So this is going to continue to be an issue going forward. The bigger question for us in terms of how we are operating, interestingly enough, again, kind of moving away from that special events model, has been, what are we looking at from the revenue stream side of the equation, and how do we make sure that we have a balance within our revenue lines, whether it's major gifts or corporate or foundations, grants, direct mail, direct response, so that we're really performing at all levels across every single one of those particular revenue lines. Some of those are going to change, right? So as we talked about before, getting in front of a major donor right now is a challenge. They'll take a call, but there's nothing like being across the table, from somebody when you're making a 7 or 8 figure ask. It's a little challenging to do it over Zoom. So I think we're going to need to figure out and adapt to what that is going to look like. Equally, I think what we're seeing in the peer-to-peer space, it has been nothing short of, just drastic changes that are happening, with people, not wanting or willing or able to go out to, large scale walks and programs along those lines. So, how are we modifying as an industry away from kind of that traditional peer-to-peer model and what that's going to look like? I don't have the answer to that at this point. If I did, I'd be sitting in your seat, Steve. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch and see how organizations really do adapt to whatever that particular new is going to be for.
And Sean, one thing I can add, sitting in my seat, we're dealing with 6 or 7 different charitable assignments a year from that many organizations, and every organization, and particularly yours, has been overly reliant on events. And we all know this, and we all sort of have fallen into this trap. Now, unrestricted money, very, very important, right? But we've had a lot of webinars on this issue. And I think if there's ever a moment to seriously go after different types of markets that you're talking about, this would be it. So, take advantage of the moment is my advice. Gary, what do you feel like you're doing? What would your advice be?
Yeah, I agree. As Sean was mentioning, around the disparities that we're seeing here in the country, like the educational inequalities within this country is not changing overnight. In light of COVID, what it's actually done is exacerbated exactly what we're seeing within the respective communities that we're working in. So if there was ever, again, a time to lean in and actually start reinvesting in how to break that cycle around poverty, it's today. We recognize that, again, we're seeing either in New York or in Dallas or in the Rio Grande, many of the cities or rural communities, there's a huge digital divide that many of our young adults have. And so we want to make sure that we are closing that divide for them. So for the next couple of years, do we need to think strategically of like, how do we financially make sure that we're in a good place? Yes, but it still needs to make sure that we don't lose sight of the educational inequalities that we have. I think what's going to be exciting strategically for us that we are doubling down, in particular in partnership with our development team, is what we highlighted earlier on, is that, in order to even be successful, college successful or college, in order to get there, there are a number of other systemic issues around race and equity that we need to be able to start having a conversation now and not sleep under the rug. So at least for the next year, I know that we are dedicating ourselves to being able to start having those hard conversations so that we can really get to the greater good of getting individuals into college and being able to have those hard conversations as well.
Got it. Okay, here's a question. I thank you for all your questions. Keep sending them because we've got a few minutes left. What's the best way to re-engage past funders? Anybody have an easy answer to that?
I don't know about an easy answer to it, but what I have said to the team is right now is the time to be leading with empathy, and that's been our message, and has been just picking up the phone and saying, "How are you?" Right? What's happening for you right now has been, I think, incredibly positive and helpful for us. And I can't tell you, how many times our frontline fundraisers have done that and have reported back that, people who had been supportive of us in the past are just simply thankful, that we are reaching out and calling and finding out how they are. And we're not, sending them a solicitation in the mail. So I think that my recommendation at this point is to lead with empathy on really all of your donors across the board.
I concur 100%, and I think people are willing to listen right now. And so just getting the ability to have that dialogue and hear from them, I think a listening tour always goes a long way as well.
So Gary, sort of the big pandemic question, if you knew what you knew now, sort of having gone through several weeks and months of pandemic, as a new leader, what do you wish that you had learned prior or that you had been told about before you took this position?
Expect the unexpected. I think, again, it's the same when you're thinking about walking in and everything looks shiny. But the reality of that, when you're building something or when you're continuing to build up of a legacy, like everything does not run as smooth as you may think it is. And so always expect the unexpected and be okay with that. Also be okay with asking for help as well. I think sometimes you go in and you feel like you have to take it all, but you have an entire team that are, powerful. They have amazing skill sets. You need to make sure that you're leveraging it. I think being a CEO doesn't mean that it's only about you. It's about empowering your staff as well to make sure that they're the best in their own space.
That's a lot of wisdom there, Gary. Good for you. Sean, anything that you wish you had been told or had learned, prior to walking into this situation? I'm talking about the pandemic now.
A lot. I wish I would have known kind of walking in. I think it's one of the things that I think you need to be prepared when you're kind of walking into the CEO seat is that you need to figure out, nobody really tells you what's going on, right? Nobody just walks into your office and says, let me tell you all of the issues that are happening within the team and the staff, and here's what they're really thinking. And so, keeping your finger on kind of the pulse of the organization and learning how to do that, especially in these times, right? I love the book Good to Great, right? And where, he talks about being a level 5 leader and really kind of walking the factory floor. And, when I was in the office, I really kind of prided myself on the ability to just kind of walk around and have just general conversations and touch base with folks. So I think, figuring out how to kind of keep your pulse on the team and what's happening, because that's, I think, really where you're going to hear issues and you'll hear ideas. Understanding how to do that before you walk into an organization, I think is a good skill set and ability to kind of think through and to have.
So final question. Oh, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, just to add to that point, I think, what was unique is that, I've actually been with the organization for over 13 years. And so you get comfortable with your staff. And I think the moment you actually get to the CEO position, the piece that's important for people to know too is like, listen to what's not being said in the room, because individuals are very comfortable with you. And so how do you make sure that you're addressing those needs as well?
So we're at the last question point here, and let's just sort of broaden it out and say, okay, we thought we were going to emerge, and sort of recover from this COVID thing, by now, or that it would start smoothing out, and we could get back to work or whatever the issue was. And, Sean, you're down in Florida. That's a tough place right now. What do you see happening? Let's look at some benchmarks. So over the summer, what do you see happening sort of post Labor Day? And then what does the fall look like to you and your organization and the world?
I'd love to say that we're going to start to bend the curve here in Florida, and we'll be back in the office by Labor Day. We actually had an office transition plan that we had put in place to start heading back this week, in fact, actually on Monday. Obviously, that is all on hold. So we're spending, really the summer months focused on perfecting our message. We have hired a market research firm who is actually tonight hosting a focus group for us. It'll be the 5th and 6th, I think, groups that we have that we've done with this particular group. We've hired a PR firm to help us think through what our messaging is going to be. We are bringing on board a direct response company to help with some of our outreach on both digital and direct response. So, I think that certainly the summer months, what I've said to the team is this is the time for planning for the fall. Do I think we're going to be full speed ahead with, major gift, officers out meeting with, at the height of my own career, I was, doing 30, 40, meetings sometimes a week with folks, right? I don't think we're going to get back to that point anytime soon. So I think we just need to figure out, how do we make sure that, number one, we can utilize analytics to help us think through who we should be talking to. I think that's been a critical component for us, is to really kind of look through our own portfolios and say, okay, how do I prioritize the people that I should be talking to instead of just, en masse? And I think it's going to be a focus on quality over quantity, kind of coming up into the fall season. So,
Gary, how do you see the future?
Saying quality over quantity is going to be essential for us. It's making sure that we're not letting our foot, off the gas and being able to support the communities that we're currently in when they're now, all the dollars are being pulled away from them. And so I think that's going to be critical from us in terms of how we still get impact within our communities and for the young adults that need it. From an organizational standpoint, we would love to be able to get back in office one day. We just don't know what that would actually look like. As I was mentioning, I just came from DC to canvass the office and seeing, what the new norm will be. But we have to do it in just segments. I think over the next 6 months, it's primarily focusing on reimagining our programming for our schools so that they can be served either virtually or in person or a hybrid, but still making sure that we're keeping the safety and the health of our, young folks and our staff at, as a priority for it all.
Well said. I'll say as a final statement that, if you've been listening to these webinars, that we've been advising communicate. A lot of what we've said today is keep that communication going. Having done that for weeks, not really asking for money through organizations that we're working with, just the relationship value of pulling that together is huge. And whether you're working on a programmatic front or talking about a campaign or whatever it is, I promise you people have more time. They want to talk. They want to be heard. They want to be heard. A lot of listening. And I still think that's an excellent strategy for all of us to bear in mind sort of each and every day. So with that, we thank you once again for participating. There are a lot of great comments on the chat box, a lot of good suggestions of people to call and such. So thanks everybody again. Thank to our two panelists. You guys are terrific, really spirited, lively discussion today. I learned a lot from you two, and good luck with your organizations. So good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Great talking.
Bye-bye.
Bye.